Hi BookTube, it's just Sarah today. Sadly, everything is sadder when Rebecca's not around, which means extra drinking. Today I am doing a wrap-up of all of the graphic novels I read in January. I got all of these, or most of these, from my local library, and I really recommend that you all do the same, because graphic novels are so expensive, and it's hard as a reader because they're such quick reads, and you can find a lot of them for free at a library. Number 1, How to Talk to Girls at Parties by Neil Gaiman. And this is based on a short story by Neil Gaiman from his Fragile Things collection, but for the record, this is adapted colored art. Everything is done by Fábio and Gabriel, who are two, I believe, Brazilian brothers. They're like twin brothers, and they work together a lot, and they're great artists. The story of How to Talk to Girls at Parties. Teenagers are in for the shock of their lives when they crash a local party only to discover that the girls there are far, far more than they appear. That's pretty vague description. It's kind of an out there, poetical, metaphorical take on the opposite sex or trying to talk to them. This I thought was just okay. It had that poetic kind of tone that a lot of Neil Gaiman stuff does that I really like about him. But the metaphor and the statement of women being these sort of otherworldly beings, as flattering as that sounds, it was just fine. The male characters are obviously, they're depicted as very dumb, and that was honestly kind of funny. It's not about them, like, winning anything, it's about them, like, getting confused and failing, and the women, like, understanding life on a much deeper level. So that was interesting, but ultimately it was like a fun, quick read, but if you're looking for, like, the deeper meaning that a lot of people had made this seem like it might have had, I didn't think it was there. But that's fine. And I'm going to show you a bit of the art just because I like to give you a little sense of what you're in for. The art is kind of cartoony, kind of 70s. The coloring was beautiful. The whole thing had a lovely tone to it. So I really liked the art. The story in general was fun and quick, but it didn't like have that kind of lush meaning, if that's what you were hoping for, to me personally. Next up is Bitch Planet. Bitch Planet is by Kelly Sue DeConnick with art by Valentine de Landro. And this is just volume 1. This is an ongoing series, and it's only 2 collected volumes in and is currently running. So if you wanted to like catch up with something new and current, this isn't too much of a dive. Just 2 volumes and you're there. So, Story of Bitch Planet, volume 1 at least. A dystopian near future, one woman's failure to comply with her patriarchal overlords results in an exile to an all-female prison planet. A new crop of prisoners deal with hidden agendas, crooked guards, and take part in the deadliest sport on Earth. So this is like heavy on the satire. Women could be like failing their marriage or put on too much weight, or they just go to prison. I found this to be really fun. It was a quick read. It didn't take long to get through. Very punchy and fast. The art was done in kind of like a 70s exploitation film style. The writing as well. If you're looking for like that satisfying take on the patriarchy and on expectations of women in a very intersectional kind of way, because there was a very diverse cast. I would say the weakest part of the story was actually kind of, I don't want to say the plot, because that sounds really lame, but in some ways the story building was the weakest point in this. The characters were a little weak. None of them were really fleshed out. A few really fun characters that I want to see more of, and I'll show you a little bit of the art because I always like to give you a preview of the art. It's kind of a classic comic book style. What I would say is it does take place on a prison planet, so there's a lot of women in it, and the female body is shown in a really diverse kind of way. It's not shown as like that over-sexualized thing you see in a lot of superhero style comic books, so that was really nice. And every issue starts with these gag advertisements, which are really funny. Like this one here says, "Stop being so fat and gross, you big fatty." And then it's like an ad for a giant tapeworm. It's, it's funny stuff. So anyway, this was really fun. Again, the plot and the characters a little bit weak, but kind of just worth it for the satire. Oh, did I fuck up my framing? I didn't. Next up, I didn't read this month, but I was talking about Kelly Sue DeConnick, and I wanted to mention this because it is my favorite Kelly Sue DeConnick. Pretty Deadly. Pretty Deadly is a Western with a heavy female-centric slant. Story is, Death's daughter wears the skull marks of her father and rides the wind on a horse made of smoke. Her origin story is a tale of retribution, as beautifully lush as it is unflinchingly savage. So it's kind of a fantasy slant, but it is like that classic Western kind of vibe, but where the like mysterious characters are like cool badass women. So that was really fun, and this is like, one of my favorites. So if you want to check out Kelly Sue DeConnick, Bitch Planet is like a fun satire that is quick, poppy kind of read, but this is, as far as I'm concerned, is a superior comic book. Almost everyone involved with this is a woman, which is more rare in comic books. The writer is Kelly Sue DeConnick, obviously a woman. Emma Ríos, art and cover. Colors by Jordi Belair. Even the editor, letters they got a dude, but that's fine. I'll show you a bit of the art. It has a classic Western look to it. Cool action, and also like the colors really have that kind of dusty sort of look to them. I can't show you that, there's some boobs in there. They have that Dust Bowl sort of look to them, and it's all very cohesive, and the art is really beautiful. This is only, I think, two volumes in as well, so again, if you wanted something fun to catch up with, this is a little bit newer as well. Next up is Wytches by Scott Snyder. This is a horror, and I am kind of particular about my comic horror because, I mean, it's not like a horror movie where you're like, you can't get away from it, it's right in your face. Like, it's a book. Also, as far as I'm concerned, lights off, nighttime with a book light. It's the only way to experience a horror comic. So this has kind of I want to say kind of a typical horror setup, like family moves to a remote town, they're dealing with family issues, and then there's monsters. What I will say is it's called Wytches, and if you read the story about what inspired the author, there's like a reason, like in his childhood he had this story about witches, but they're not witches. Let me just get that out of the way. Not about witches. It's pretty much a monster horror. As much as this had like a typical setup, what I really liked about this is that it brought it back to like the emotional place. To me, some of the best horror has like an emotional real life connection, and that the horror just exemplifies. So this had a really wonderful father-daughter romance. It was about a mother and father and their one teenage daughter, and the teenage daughter is experiencing anxiety. The anxiety issue I thought was cool to represent, but it wasn't really fleshed out, it was more just spoken upon. Because they focused so much on the father relationship, the mother was not my favorite character. But I did like that in this story, the mother was in a wheelchair, which is great representation to me personally, because my mother is in a wheelchair. So that's actually something I really like to see represented as far as disability goes. Definitely a little spooky, and just a really cool to see the family side of those things. And I'll show you a little bit of the art. The art had this slightly, like, otherworldly element to it, even as it was realistic. It had that kind of a look to it, and the coloring was really consistent throughout, really a mood to it. The fantasy, this is actually the first page of it, you can see some of the horror elements. In comic books, I actually like it when for horror specifically, when the art gets a little abstract. It's not like a movie where you could flash something or just look at something for a second. In a comic book, you can just sit there and stare at it for as long as you want. So when things are kept kind of dark and a little abstract, I think it actually is to the benefit of the story. So I liked that. And the story is by Scott Snyder. The art is by Jock. The coloring, I think, is what made the art in this. The colors are by Matt Hollingsworth. I think colors are, like, super important in a horror comic book. Anyway, this is ongoing. Scott Snyder has written a lot of, like, Batman comic books, so if you've read any recent Batman, I think he's written some of that. This was more of, like, a passion project for him, Wytches. So it was really, really good, and you felt personal with the family. Good choice if you like horror comics, which to me are hit or miss. This is a good one. So that's my comic book wrap-up for January. So I will see you next time, BookTube, for maybe more graphic novels. Ciao.